Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Be sure to check out Dragon Shield for all of the best accessories to protect your decks. TCG Player for cards at great prices while supporting local game stores. And Patreon, where you get awesome benefits for your direct support. Our Patreon Discord CEDH Webcam League is in full swing this month. We are giving away $1,000 in cash prizes. All you have to do is sign up to Patreon at any tier to gain access. Check us out on Twitch every Wednesday evening for great games of CEDH with special guests every week. If you sub to Twitch, you'll get additional perks such as access to our Discord. On February 26th, we are hosting a CEDH tournament on our Discord. It will be 100% proxy friendly and there is over $1,200 in cash prizes. All you have to do to participate in the tournament is sign up to our Patreon. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Mike piloting the partner pair of Bruse, Boris Herder, and Thrasios Triton Hero. This mid-range list looks to grind value with Thrasios and pressure opponents' life totals with Bruse. Mike's opening hand contains a Chain of Vapor, Volcanic Island, Lotus Petal, Misty Rainforest, Mindbreak Trap, Sea of Clouds, and his London Mulligan is a Verdant Catacombs. Next, we have Cal piloting Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter. This deck looks to control the game through Rashmi triggers and sets up a win through Isochron Scepter. Cal's opening hand contains a Sylvan Library, Soul Ring, Scalding Tarn, Chrome Mox, Gilded Drake, Wavebreak Hippocamp, and his London Mulligan is a Jataxian Probe. After that, we have Ryan piloting Birgi, God of Storytelling. This Storm list aims to cast a bunch of spells to leverage Birgi's triggered ability. Ryan's opening hand contains a Faithless Looting, Jeweled Lotus, Snow-Covered Mountain, Aetherflux Reservoir, Burning Inquiry, Ignite the Future, and a Renegade Tactics. Finally, we have Zach piloting the partner pair of Tymna the Weaver and Kraum Ludovic's Opus. This list seeks to grind value through its commanders and assemble a win through the vast amount of card draw the deck runs. Zach's opening hand contains a Mana Crypt, Tarnished Citadel, Windswept Heath, Demonic Consultation, Mistcast, Opposition Agent, and a Chain of Vapor. Without further ado, let's kick off this jittery jocular jigsaw of judicious jealousy. Mike wore jorts to tonight's game and gets to start us off. Mike draws a card for turn and plays a Misty Rainforest. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Taiga onto the battlefield. He casts Birds of Paradise. He casts Lotus Petal. He passes. Cal draws a card for turn and casts Chrome Mox, imprinting Wavebreak Hippocamp. He casts a Soul Ring. He plays Scalding Tarn. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Tropical Island onto the battlefield. He casts Sylvan Library. He gives the turn to Ryan. Ryan draws and plays a Snow-Covered Mountain. He casts Jeweled Lotus. He cracks his Lotus to help cast his commander, Birgi, God of Storytelling. The table wipes the sweat off their brow as Ryan simply passes to Zach. Zach draws and plays a Windswept Heath. He casts a Mana Crypt. He ships the turn. Mike draws and plays a Sea of Clouds. He casts a Wild Growth targeting Sea of Clouds. He casts his commander, Thrasios Triton Hero. He passes. During his draw step, Cal draws 2 extra through Sylvan Library, paying 8 life to keep them both. In his main phase, he casts Preordain, scrying 2 and drawing a card. He plays a Flooded Strand. He cracks it and pays a life. In response, Zach cracks his Windswept Heath, pays a life, and fetches up a Scrubland onto the battlefield. Zach then flashes in an Opposition Agent. In response, Mike casts Crop Rotation, sacrificing Taiga. He fetches up a Gaia's Cradle onto the battlefield. With Opposition Agent still on the stack, Cal casts Delay. Delay resolves and Opposition Agent gets countered and exiled with 3-time counters on it. Then finally, Cal fetches up a Breeding Pool onto the battlefield untapped, paying 2 life. He casts Birds of Paradise. He gives the turn to Ryan. Ryan draws and casts Faithless Looting. Birgi triggers and Ryan adds a red. Looting resolves and Ryan draws 2 and then discards Mizzix's Mastery and Ignite the Future. He casts Renegade Tactics. Birgi triggers and Ryan adds a red. Then Tactics resolves and he draws. He plays a Snow-Covered Mountain. He casts Burning Inquiry. Birgi adds a red and then everyone draws 3 and then discards 3 at random. Ryan casts Chrome Mox. Birgi triggers, adding a red. It resolves and Ryan imprints Infernal Plunge. Ryan flashes back Faithless Looting. Birgi adds a red and Ryan draws 2 and discards 2. He casts Chromatic Star and Birgi adds a red. He cracks Chromatic Star, drawing a card. He casts Conjurer's Bauble and Birgi adds a red. He cracks the bauble, putting Deflecting Swat from his graveyard onto the bottom of his library and draws a card. He casts Desperate Ritual. Birgi adds a red and then Ryan adds 3 more red. He casts Aetherflux Reservoir. He moves to combat and attacks Zach. Zach takes it and Ryan, petered out, passes the turn. During his upkeep, Zach removes a time counter from Opposition Agent. Still in his upkeep, he wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and casts Imperial Seal. He fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. He ships the turn to Mike. Mike draws and casts Seedborn Muse. He attacks Zach with Thrasios. Zach takes it, and Mike passes. Mike untaps with Cal through Seedborn. During his draw step, Cal draws 2 extra through Sylvan Library, paying 4 life to keep an extra. In his first main phase, he plays Polluted Delta. He casts his commander, Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter. In response, Mike activates Thrasios, scrying 1 and revealing a volcanic island onto the battlefield tapped. Rashmi resolves, and Cal passes to Ryan. Ryan draws, and sighs. He casts Winds of Change. Aetherflux triggers, and Ryan gains a life. Birgi triggers, and Ryan adds a red. In response, Cal casts Rapid Hybridization targeting Seedborn Muse, triggering Rashmi. In response, Mike activates Thrasios. He scries 1 and reveals a Noble Hierarch into his hand. Rashmi's trigger resolves, and Cal reveals a Blue Sun Zenith into his hand. Then Rapid Hybridization resolves, Seedborn is destroyed, and Mike creates a 3/3 Frog Lizard. Winds of Change resolves, and each player shuffles their hands into their libraries and then draws that mini. Ryan moves to combat and attacks Zach with Birgi. Zach takes it, and Ryan passes. During his upkeep, Zach removes a time counter from Opposition Agent. Also in his upkeep, he wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and plays a Marsh Flats. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. He casts his commander, Tymna the Weaver. He gives the turn to Mike. At the end of Zach's turn, Mike activates Thrasios, scrying 1 and revealing a Temple Garden onto the battlefield tapped. Mike draws and plays a Polluted Delta. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a tropical island onto the battlefield. He casts Rhystic Study. He moves to combat and attacks Ryan with Thrasios. Ryan takes it, and Mike passes the turn. At the end of Mike's turn, Cal cracks Polluted Delta, pays a life, and fetches up an island onto the battlefield. During his draw step, Cal draws 2 extra from Sylvan Library, putting 2 back on top. In his main phase, he plays a Mana Confluence. He casts Sapphire Medallion, Rashmi, and Rhystic Trigger. Cal pays for Rhystic, and then Cal reveals Simic Signet into his hand. Cal ships the turn. Ryan draws, and passes. During his upkeep, Zach removes the last time counter from Opposition Agent and casts it for free. Also in his upkeep, he wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and plays a Steam Vents, and to play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts his other commander, Kraum, Ludovic's Opus. Rhystic triggers, and Mike draws. Zach moves to combat and attacks Mike with Kraum. Mike takes it, and in his second main phase, Zach pays 1 life and draws 1 through Tymna. Zach ends his turn. At the end of Zach's turn, Mike activates Thrasios, scrying 1 and revealing a Gemstone Caverns, putting it onto the battlefield tapped. Still in the end step, Cal delves away some of his graveyard to help cast Dig Through Time, paying the Rhystic tax. Rashmi triggers, and in response, Mike casts Dispel, countering Dig Through Time. Then Rashmi's trigger resolves, and Cal reveals a Cyclonic Rift into his hand. The turn moves to Mike. Mike draws and plays a Savannah. He casts a Bloom Tender. He passes the turn. During his draw step, Cal draws 2 extra through Sylvan Library, paying 4 life to keep an extra. In his main phase, he plays a Yavimaya Coast. He casts Simic Signet, paying for Rhystic. Rashmi triggers, and he reveals a Flooded Grove into his hand. With nothing else, he gives the turn to Ryan. Ryan draws and plays a Bloodstained Mire. Once again, he passes. During his upkeep, Zach loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. Zach draws and moves to combat. He attacks Mike with Kraum. Mike takes it, and in his second main phase, Zach pays 1 and draws 1 through Tymna. He plays a Plateau for turn. He casts Ranger Captain of Eos, paying for Rhystic. In response, Mike activates Thrasios. He scries 1 and reveals Derevi, Imperial Tactician, into his hand. He activates Thrasios, scrying 1 and revealing a Hallowed Fountain onto the battlefield tapped. Then Ranger enters, and Zach fetches up a Dragon's Rage Channeler into his hand. He casts Dragon's Rage Channeler. Rhystic triggers, and Mike draws. With nothing left, Zach gives the turn to Mike. Mike draws and plays a Mana Confluence. He casts Derevi, Imperial Tactician. Derevi enters, and Mike floats 5 green through Gaia's Cradle. Derevi untaps Cradle, and then Mike casts Eternal Witness. Kraum triggers, and Zach draws. Eternal Witness enters and targets Emil the Blessed in Mike's graveyard. In response, Zach cracks his Ranger Captain of Eos, attempting to stop Mike from winning. In response, Cal taps his Mana Confluence to cast Blue Sun Zenith, where X equals 5, paying for Rhystic. Rashmi triggers, revealing a Mana Drain into his hand. Zenith resolves, Cal draws 5, and then shuffles Blue Suns back into his library. Then Ranger's ability resolves. With Eternal Witness's ability still in the stack, Zach casts Deflecting Swat for its alternate cost, targeting Eternal Witness's trigger. Rhystic triggers, and Mike draws. Channeler triggers, and Zach surveils a Mana Confluence into his graveyard. SWAT resolves, and Zach changes the target of Eternal Witness from Emil the Blessed to Misty Rainforest in Mike's graveyard. Then Witness's ability finally resolves, and Mike returns Misty to his hand. Mike casts Zerta the Dawnwaker. He activates Thrasios, scrying 1 and revealing a Cyclonic Rift into his hand. He activates Thrasios again, scrying 1 and revealing a Lightning Bolt into his hand. He taps Cradle and then activates Thrasios, revealing Arid Mesa into play tapped, Swan Song, Noble Hierarch, and finally Waterlogged Grove into play tapped. He moves to combat and attacks Cal with his 3/3 Frizzard. Cal takes it, Derevi triggers, and Mike untaps his Cradle. Mike passes, discarding to hand size. During his draw step, Cal draws 2 extra through Sylvan Library, paying 4 life to keep an extra. In his main phase, he plays a Rejuvenating Springs. He casts Malevolent Hermit, paying for Rhystic. Rashmi triggers, and he reveals Reap into his hand. Cal passes, discarding to hand size. Ryan draws and casts Mox Amber. Rhystic triggers, and Ryan pays. Birgi triggers and adds a red. Aetherflux triggers, and Ryan gains a life. He casts Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer. Birgi, Aetherflux, Rhystic, and Kraum trigger. Zach draws, Ryan pays for Rhystic, he gains 2 through Aetherflux, and then adds a red through Birgi. Then with nothing else, Ryan passes. At the end of Ryan's turn, Cal casts Nexus of Fate, paying for Rhystic. Rashmi triggers, and in response, Mike casts Swansong. In response, Cal casts Force of Negation, exiling a blue card, targeting Swansong. Rhystic triggers, Mike draws, Kraum triggers, and Zach draws. In response, Mike activates Thrasios, scrying 1 and revealing Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy, into his hand. Mike activates Thrasios again, scrying 1 and revealing an Arbor Elf, Dreneth Magistrate, and a Mox Amber all into his hand. With Force of Negation still on the stack, Cal taps his Mana Confluence to help activate Malevolent Hermit, sacrificing it, targeting Swansong. Swansong is countered, Force of Negation fizzles, Rashmi's trigger resolves, and Cal reveals Nature's Claim. He casts Nature's Claim for free through Rashmi, paying for Rhystic Study, targeting Rhystic Study. Study is destroyed, Mike gains 4 life, and Nexus of Fate finally resolves. Cal gets an extra turn and shuffles Nexus of Fate back into his library. The turn moves to Cal. During his draw step, Cal draws 2 extra through Sylvan Library, putting both back on top. In his main phase, he casts Benevolent Geist from his graveyard for its disturb cost. Rashmi triggers, and Cal reveals Nexus of Fate. He puts it into his hand, and everyone scratches their head in suspicion. Cal casts Reap. Kraum triggers, and Zach draws. In response, Mike taps his Mana Confluence to cast Lightning Bolt, targeting Benevolent Geist. Geist dies, then Reap resolves, and then Cal returns Dig Through Time and Muddle the Mixture to his hand. Cal taps his Mana Confluence to cast Nexus of Fate again. He gets an extra turn and shuffles Nexus thoroughly back into his library. Cal passes to himself. During his draw step, Cal draws 2 extra through Sylvan Library, putting 2 back on top. In his main phase, he delves away some of his graveyard to help cast Dig Through Time. Rashmi triggers, and Cal reveals a Pact of Negation into his hand. Dig resolves, Cal looks at the top 7, puts 2 into his hand, and bottoms the rest. Cal casts Mystic Remora. Kraum triggers, and Zach draws. Unfortunately out of steam, Cal passes to Zach. During his upkeep, Zach loses his Mana Crypt trigger and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Wooded Foothills. Zach moves to combat and attacks Cal with Kraum and Ryan with his Channeler. They both take it, and in his second main phase, Zach pays 2 and draws 2 through Tymna. He cracks his Wooded Foothills, paying a life, and fetches up a Badlands onto the battlefield. He casts Savine's Reclamation, targeting Ranger Captain of Eos, Channeler, and Mystic Trigger. Cal draws, and then Zach surveils City of Brass into his graveyard. Savine's resolves, and Ranger Captain enters. It triggers, and Zach fetches up an Esper Sentinel into his hand. He sacks his Ranger Captain, silencing his opponents this turn. Zach casts Thassa's Oracle. With the trigger on the stack, he casts Tainted Pact. It resolves, and Zach exiles his entire library. Thassa's Oracle's trigger resolves, and Zach wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a game. Congrats to Zach on his win. Great job to Cal and Mike for showing off how many cards they could draw this game. Special shout out to Ryan for showing off how many cards he was enabled to draw this game. No, seriously, Cal and Mike's decks are amazing at grinding through long games to create insanely powerful board states. In this game, however, they spent so much time battling each other. That enabled Zach to set up his own win without much interruption. The most valuable card in tonight's game goes to Thrasios, Triton Hero. Thrasios gave Mike insane card advantage and board presence starting the turn after Thrasios was cast. At the very end, Mike had more lands than the rest of the table combined. It truly showcases the power of this commander. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.